Why are the Americans threatening Burkina Faso? Why is Trump going to back for the French and going after this guy? Why is the head of the U.S. AFRICOM, the Africa Command, talking about the need to secure Burkina Faso's resources? Because this guy is the boogeyman to European imperialism. He's a young black African Muslim Marxist who is digging out the French deep state in Africa. French colonialism never ended in Africa. The French have a very effective deep state in Africa. Through the banking system, through fake ownership of the natural resources of Africa, they have been able to maintain economic and political and military control over much of their former colonies. Most of the wealth of France is still stolen from Africa. The gold that fills their banks, the uranium that powers their metropolis, all of this is looted from Africa. When they pulled out, they installed a deep state with corrupt rulers that they could pay off in order to get resources for practically nothing. And Traoré is ending that system. French created a banking system for Africa that gives France basic entire control over those nations' economies. The Africans actually have to borrow their own money at interest from France. And the gold mines, the uranium mines, all the natural resources in these countries are treated as French property, and Traoré has been making them property of the Burkina people. And as leader of the Alliance of Sahel States, his neighbors have been joining in on it. France has been getting driven out of Africa. Some good information on it. Check out the Al Jazeera documentary, The Gold Mafia, from Al Jazeera Investigates, or this Caspian Report video about how the French bank basically owns a bunch of African countries. Now, while Trump probably does not have any direct financial interest in the French Empire, there's what they always called the threat of a good example. The reason they tried to kill Fidel Castro so many times and blockaded Cuba was not just because of the loss of the banana fields and sugarcane fields. It was that if driving imperialism out of a country improves the standard of living in that country, then there's the threat of a good example of other countries replicating. So any country that dared to defy imperialism had to be severely punished. And what Brother Ibrahim has been doing and the Alliance of Sahel States have been doing has been improving the standard of living in their countries by using those resources for those countries, and that is a threat to imperialism worldwide. There's been something like 20 or 21 coup attempts or assassination attempts on him so far, and they're not going to stop. This guy is perhaps the single greatest threat to the imperialist world order right now. Tomorrow, April 30th, there's supposed to be a continent-wide protest for him across Africa. His cause is being taken up all over the continent, and it is a wonderful thing.
They enjoy saying it every year in their economic surveys. Burkina Faso is the poorest country, Mali is the poorest country, Niger is the poorest country. We are ranked among the last. Very well, if we are as poor as they say, but when the time came to take responsibility, we asked these masters to leave. Why don't they want to leave?
And that's a question every single colonial power and an imperialist government has to answer. See, I remember one time people told me about Norway and how it avoided the oil curse. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of like an extension of the resource paradox, meaning that, the more resources a country has, is a paradox that is prone to either being extremely rich or extremely poor. Okay? The oil curse is the more oil we have, you tend to always either get into conflict, etc. But you know what's interesting about that? They tell you that Norway avoided this because they were really smart. And I'm not saying they weren't. Two things can be true. You know what I'm saying? They set up a sovereign fund. They declared that the oil should be for Norway. The fund should be for Norway. The money that they make off the oil, they should be the ones refining, distributing oil. The one thing they don't tell you, though, is Norway was left the hell alone. No imperialist government to tell you, oh, we don't like your leadership. They're not a beacon of democracy. Let's help set up a coup d'etat, destabilize your country while your country's destabilized, steal and loot your resources. No country to come in and say, oh, you have no right to nationalize your resources. How dare you do that? Right? No country to tell you, well, listen, before you became independent, this was a deal you used to have. So let's find a way to set it up where you're good and we're good. Exactly, right? I always think about Norway every single time. And I think about it. What's so special about Norway? Why were they left alone? Was it geography, location? Maybe going to loot and steal off the Norwegians just wouldn't work. They weren't a powerful country. Was it allyship? No. I can't quite put my finger on it. It's right there, but I can't quite. Why were they? Oh, the complexion for the protection. That's all it was, right? Because it's easier to sell to the world that these folks in Africa who tend to be darker skinned, that's the thing about anti-blackness. They don't know what they're doing. They weren't responsible for finding. We helped. When our government was there, we helped them discover what was in their land. They don't know how to manage it. It's easy to just say, okay, they don't know how to govern, so we're trying to help them figure out who's going to be in government. And it just so happened to be a dictator for 50 years. That is the opposite of everything that you said you wanted in a democracy, etc. But he sure makes sure that check clears. You dig what I'm saying? I've said enough. Actually, I haven't. Just to let you know, they running that play with Traoré over there, too. Keep your eyes open.
В значительной степени тот уровень благосостояния, который достигнут в бывших колониальных державах, он основан на ограблении Африки. Это всем известно хорошо. Да, собственно, исследователи в той же самой Европе этого и не скрывают. Так и есть. Они говорят, на горе и страданиях африканских народов построено в значительной степени, не говорю целиком и полностью, нет, но в значительной степени благополучие колониальных держав. Это очевидный факт. Ограбление, работорговля, конечно.
Ibrahim Traoré is bringing attention to something that's been happening in Africa for a very, very long time, for decades, which is Western countries manipulating, using, and abusing their power to control resources in Africa, to stage coups in Africa. We could talk about Patrick Lumumba. We could even talk about Ukraine. They did it in Ukraine. We could talk about plenty of countries in Africa that they've done this in Libya. We can go on and on and on. The United States, along with their allies in the West, have done this for a very long time. So it's pretty awesome to see that this issue with Ibrahim Traoré is bringing people together to understand that, hey, listen, this can no longer happen. Africa needs to be independent. Countries in Africa need to be independent. People always say, oh, Africa is poor. Well, duh, if you're getting robbed for all your resources and they're taking advantage of you any chance that they get, of course you are going to have issues when we're talking about poverty. We're going to have poverty issues. And then we have leaders in Africa who don't have the backbone like Ibrahim Traoré has. They don't have the guts like Ibrahim Traoré has. So he is bringing attention to a very important matter that you and your people need to know about. You need to share the word, let people know that what they're trying to do is they're trying to stage a coup, right? They're trying to stage a coup against Ibrahim Traoré and his government so that they could put somebody in place who is a puppet, who will do the bidding for them, who will allow them to use their resources, who is corruptible. Ibrahim Traoré is not corruptible. That's what he's shown. He's shown the guts, the balls, and people need to know about this. So share this message with people that you know, and let's raise awareness together.
You know, there's something that BlackRock has been warning about for years, since at least 2011. You know, they put out this threat assessment or risk assessment for investors periodically, and one of the so-called threats that they've been concerned about is what they call resource nationalism, which of course refers to the incredibly dangerous situation when a country starts to treat its own natural resources as their own. When countries commit the ideological crime or the ideological error of imagining that they should have sovereignty over their own resources and that their own people should benefit from those resources, because of course the required understanding is that their resources do not belong to them and belong by default to multinational corporations and Western investors. Now it is noteworthy that this sentiment was previously expressed by governments, by like the State Department and so on, back in the 1960s and 1970s. The US and the West in general regarded any form of economic nationalism in the global South, in the Muslim world, in the Arab world, and so on, as a grave threat to American and Western interests. Now, this is being expressed directly by the private sector, by the OCGFC, by the new empire of capital. And this is indicative, in my opinion, of the evolution of power dynamics in the world. Power now is not that concerned about American or Western interests. They're concerned about the interests of multinational corporations and the global financial elite. And it's unacceptable to them if countries in the global South, particularly in Africa, start believing that they have or should have control over their own natural resources. Now, back in 2019, the country that had the highest rank, the highest risk of economic nationalism was the Democratic Republic of Congo. Note that this pertains specifically to the mining sector and the extraction of minerals. About a year later, the M23 rebels re-emerged after being more or less dormant since 2013. And I think we're all familiar with the violence and instability currently plaguing the DRC. Another country ranked as being an extreme risk of economic nationalism in 2019 was Venezuela. And since then, since 2019, there was an attempted coup, rigged elections, and sanctions against that country, creating an economic and humanitarian crisis. Russia was another country that was ranked as an extreme risk of economic nationalism. And I think we're all aware of the measures taken against Russia over the last couple of years. Now, there were a number of other countries back in 2019 that were ranked as high risk, not extreme risk, but high risk of so-called economic nationalism. And these included Turkey, Indonesia, Pakistan, Libya, Syria, Kazakhstan, and wait for it, Saudi Arabia. Other countries like Malaysia and Iraq were singled out for what they regarded as moves that they had made towards economic or resource nationalism, economic sovereignty, moves that they thought put them on a trajectory towards a high-risk status. Now, it should be obvious that being ranked as being at risk of exercising economic sovereignty is regarded by the OCGFC as not only a punishable offense, but it is something that they will move rapidly to preempt. And they have organizations like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. They have at their disposal the powers of the state. All of the powers that the state has at their disposal are at the disposal of the OCGFC because they are entirely captured by the OCGFC. So what that means is that confrontation, negotiation, conflict, or diplomacy today is going to be primarily carried out between the governments of the Global South and Western private sector power, not between their governments and the governments of the West. Because imperialism today operates differently. Imperialism today is carried out by an a-national private sector. The owners and controllers of global financialized capital represent a collective emperor, a collective colonizing power that itself transcends any single state or grouping of states. They don't need the money now. They don't need the money and the resources that they extract from colonized countries to necessarily flow to this country or to that country. They just need it to flow into their corporate accounts, their profit margins, their dividends, and so on. They don't need the US to control anything, or the UK to control anything, or Europe to control anything. They just need their investors, their shareholders, their companies to control things. These officials of the empire of capital are not particularly interested in the standard of living of America, or of the UK, or of Europe, and so on. They have taken the logic of neoliberalism, and they see no reason why Western countries should be exempt from that logic. Their societies can be bankrupted and exploited too. Their populations can be oppressed and enslaved too. Their countries can be sabotaged and destabilized too if it's profitable. And the converse is also true. The countries of the Global South can improve their standard of living. They can be less exploited, they can be stable, and so forth, as long as the OCGFC, the Western-based OCGFC, are profiting. Economic nationalism, however, resource nationalism, poses a threat to this new imperialism because it has the potential of cutting them out of the picture. And if they think they're going to be cut out of the picture, then they'll just burn the picture. They will mobilize state power, which includes national militaries, intelligence agencies, and so-called international institutions like the UN, the WTO, and so on. They will mobilize those to terrorize the economies and the societies of any country that they think is trying to shut them out. So whenever you see military action being taken, or whenever you see what appears to be subterfuge or subversion or covert destabilization in a country in the Global South, and that indicates to me that that's a country whose government has diplomatically and strategically failed to negotiate its sovereignty with the OCGFC. Because just as in the past, American power, Western state power, could not be ignored, could not be safely defied in a bold and unilateral, uncompromising manner without it resulting in an invasion or a coup or an assassination. So too today, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital and entities like BlackRock and Vanguard cannot be ignored. They cannot be defied, and they cannot be entirely sidelined without disastrous results. Like it or not, these are the power dynamics that exist in the world today.
France's economy is in trouble, and no one's talking about why. But here's the truth: Africa is cutting the cord. For decades, France built its wealth on the backs of its former colonies, but now, leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, and Mamadi Doumbouya are rewriting history. The era of colonial taxes is ending. The CFA franc is on its way out, and France is feeling the heat. So what happens when the golden pipeline dries up? What happens when Africa says no more? Let's break it down. Most people have no idea just how much France relies on its former colonies. But let's put it in perspective. 14 African nations still use the CFA franc, a currency controlled by France. These countries have been forced to keep 50% of their reserves in France's central bank. France gets first access to their resources, their trade, their wealth, all while African nations struggle. This is why France has remained one of the world's top economies. Not because of innovation, not because of sheer economic power, but because of Africa. And now that foundation is crumbling. A new wave of African leaders is saying enough is enough. Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, cutting ties with France, taking back control of resources. Assimi Goïta in Mali, ditching French military presence, reclaiming sovereignty. Mamadi Doumbouya in Guinea, nationalizing industries, ending dependency. This isn't just a political shift, it's an economic earthquake. The CFA franc on its last breath, military presence being kicked out, trade deals under African control. France's grip on Africa is slipping, and without Africa's wealth, France's economy is heading for disaster. So what happens next? How does this shake France's economy to its core? First, the loss of billions in revenue. France has quietly siphoned off Africa's wealth for decades. Without forced reserves in the French treasury, the free money stops flowing. Second, trade agreements are in jeopardy. African nations are looking east to China, Russia, and even intra-African trade. France loses its privileged deals, meaning exports will drop. A financial crisis is coming. Less African wealth means France needs new sources of income, but where? Public debt in France is already rising. The gap Africa filled will now become a black hole. And this is just the beginning. This isn't just about Africa, this is about a global shift in power. The same way Europe depended on Africa's resources for centuries, now we're watching that system collapse. Africa is reclaiming control. France is scrambling to adjust. And the world is watching. The question is, will France survive without Africa? Or was its economy never as strong as they made us believe?
Have you ever wondered why France has been so much involved in Africa, especially in the Sahel region? Former French President Jacques Chirac once said, France would become a third world country without Africa. Now, it seems to be happening as France and French corporations are facing massive losses after they have been kicked out from Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Recently, it has been revealed that Air France has faced a collective loss of 65 million euros because it was kicked out of the Sahel region. The loss has been so painful that Air France wants to return to the Sahel region. However, Ibrahim Traoré from Burkina Faso and other military leaders in Mali and Niger will never let that happen. So what desperate actions France is making for an immediate return to Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, and what losses it is facing? In this video, let's know about that. For decades, France relied on Africa as its economic backbone, extracting wealth while maintaining geopolitical leverage over the continent. However, after revolutionary military leaders come to power in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, things have changed entirely. They brought a watershed moment for France, a major shock that has rattled France and French companies. The expulsion of French troops, corporations, and political influence from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso has shattered France's economic stranglehold over the region. Nowhere is this decline more visible than in the financial devastation faced by Air France, which has lost over 65 million euros since being forced out of the Sahel. For Air France, the Sahel was more than just another destination. It was a highly profitable monopoly. The airline generated staggering daily revenues, 500 million CFA francs from Mali, 430 million from Niger, and 390 million from Burkina Faso. adding up to over 2 million euros per day. This level of profit was a reflection of just how deeply France depended on the Sahel for economic survival. And we are only talking about one of the hundreds of companies. But with the rise of military-led governments in these nations and their firm rejection of French dominance, Air France was pushed out, cutting off one of its most lucrative revenue streams. The result has been a financial catastrophe, leaving the airline scrambling to regain access to the region. However, the new governments have made it clear that the era of France's unchecked exploitation is over. The revolutionary leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger represent a new era of African governance, one that prioritizes sovereignty over submission. These leaders have taken bold steps to dismantle France's economic and military grip on their countries. That's because they know the reason France has leverage is because of the financial benefits it gets from Africa. If these are stopped, France will no longer have the financial backing that gives it international support. You should know that France has long maintained an image of economic strength and industrial power, but much of its success was built on resources it did not actually possess. Despite having little to no significant reserves of gold, uranium, and critical minerals, France remained a major exporter of these commodities for decades. These resources were not French, they were African. France extracted them from its former colonies, rebranded them as its own, and profited while African nations remained underdeveloped. One of the biggest examples of this exploitation was gold. France has no major gold mines, yet it exported vast quantities of the precious metal. The source has always been West African nations like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, where French companies controlled mining operations under unfair contracts. These deals ensured that African countries received only a small fraction of the wealth generated, while the gold was refined in France and sold as a French commodity. On this, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni openly exposed France on live TV. Now, with Sahel nations reclaiming their resources and kicking out French companies, France's so-called gold exports have all but disappeared, revealing how dependent it was on African wealth. The same pattern applies to uranium, coltan, cobalt, and lithium, essential minerals for modern technology, electric vehicles, and batteries. France does not have significant reserves of these minerals, yet it remains an important player in the high-tech industry. But that is changing. Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali's rejection of French influence is not just about political autonomy, but also about dismantling the structural economic dependence that kept Africa subservient to France. This movement gained momentum through a series of military coups that fundamentally altered the power dynamics in the Sahel. The overthrow of pro-French regimes was not merely about local politics, but an outright rejection of France's neocolonial dominance. Paris reacted with fury, attempting to impose sanctions, severing diplomatic ties, and seeking to isolate the new governments. Yet these actions only accelerated France's downfall in the region. Instead of bowing to external pressure, the new leadership expelled French troops, shut down French embassies, and nationalized key industries that were once controlled by French corporations. Among the most symbolic and financially devastating blows was the removal of Air France, cutting off a major economic artery for France. For decades, Air France was more than just an airline. It was a strategic economic weapon, ensuring France's continued control over African air travel. The airline dictated flight routes, monopolized key connections, and extracted wealth from the region while reinvesting little into local economies. Air France maintained a near-total monopoly on flights between the Sahel and Europe, keeping fares artificially high while providing subpar services compared to other international carriers. This system funneled enormous sums of money out of Africa and into French corporate coffers, reinforcing France's economic grip on the region. However, when the revolutionary government seized power, they began to question why Air France was allowed to operate so freely while contributing so little to African nations. When the airline abruptly suspended flights in response to political changes, the Sahel nations responded by banning Air France from returning and exploring alternative partnerships. Mali's Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop openly criticized the airline's arrogance and exploitative business practices, exposing how it routinely canceled flights without accountability, stranding African passengers in Europe and elsewhere. He pointed out that such reckless behavior would never be tolerated in the US or other Western nations, yet Air France felt it could do as it pleased in Africa. That era, he stated, is over. If Air France wants to return, it will stand in line like any other company, without privilege, without special treatment. France is no longer in control. Africa is.
Bon, alors pourquoi vous me faites dire ça? Donc, moi je vous dis, tout le monde se bat. Vous avez vécu quelque chose de terrible. Tout le monde se bat, quelle que soit la couleur de peau. Et n'opposez pas les gens. N'opposez pas les gens. Si vous opposez les gens, on est foutus. Parce que vous êtes contents d'être en France. Parce que si c'était pas la France, pour vous dire, vous seriez 10 000 fois plus dans la merde. Il n'y a pas un endroit de l'océan Indien où on aide autant les gens. C'est la réalité. Et donc, on ne peut pas vouloir être un département français et dire que ça ne marche pas dès que la France est en solidarité. Quel est l'autre territoire de cette région comme ailleurs qui livre de l'eau, du fret, des soignants comme on le fait ici? Alors il faut que tout le monde se respecte. Mais bon sang, on tiendra jusqu'au bout si on est une équipe. Et donc vous avez un choix simple. Vous êtes une équipe ou vous divisez.
Of French President Emmanuel Macron publicly racially abusing and embarrassing former Burkina Faso President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore has resurfaced and is going viral. In this video from 2017, French President Macron publicly embarrassed the president of Burkina Faso, following which the latter left the hall. When one of the Burkinabe students asked President Macron a question about Burkina Faso's constant power cuts, this is what the French president had to say.
You speak to me as if France was still a colonial power, but I do not want to take care of electricity problems in the universities of Burkina Faso. That's his job. That's the job of the president. So on the other hand, I reassure you. Oh, what's this? He's going away. Stay there. Maybe he's off to repair the air conditioning.
Macron would shamelessly tell French media that it was just a joke and that some Africans need to have thicker skins. After being publicly disrespected by President Macron, President Kabore went on to lose respect throughout the country and was portrayed as an obedient French puppet. These sentiments contributed to his removal in 2022 in a peaceful coup. Burkina Faso is now led by a young Pan-African army captain, Ibrahim Traoré, who spearheaded the latest coup and was named interim president until elections are held in July 2024. He also insulted all Africans.
I think they forgot to say thank you to us. It's not a big deal. It will come with time.
There is a part that caught my attention where he talked about ingratitude.
Gratitude, I am well aware, is a non-transmissible disease to humans.
He is human. Our ingratitude is not transmissible to him. This is how this gentleman sees Africa, sees Africans. We are not human. In his eyes, I think that if he is not an atheist and he prays, every morning when he wakes up and prays, he should also pray to the Africans. Because it is thanks to our ancestors that there is a France today. He should pray to us.
My name is Black Coffee. I'm a media personality in Ghana. Since I was in my 20s, I have been a Pan-Africanist. I used to write for New African magazine. I was always promoting Africa. I'm a Pan-Africanist. And so there's no way I can sit down and watch France or USA kill another African leader. France alone have killed 22 African presidents. France alone. Not USA combined. France alone have killed 22 African leaders. Anytime African leader wants to work for the people, France and UK and USA will interfere. Why? Americans don't all like Trump. They don't all like Macron in France, but you don't see us going to kill them. And so enough is enough. We read the history books about Sankara. We read about Lumumba. We read about Nkrumah. We've read about them. I'm not going to sit down for my great-grandchild to read about Tuareg being killed. So as long as I am alive, I will stand and fight for Africa. I'm not walking just like this. This be a spiritual battle. We have gone to the rivers. We have called the ancestors. We are fighting for Africa, and that is why I am here. There's no way I will live and watch them kill Traoré. Touch Ibrahim Traoré, you touch every black person in the world. Yeah. We will not take it. France, the USA, bugger off and leave Africa alone. That's why I'm here.
Ibrahim alive.
Attack. Fiery South African politician Julius Malema has launched a scathing attack on French neocolonialism in Africa and seemed to shower indirect praises on Burkina Faso's charismatic leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, for being brave enough to kick them out. Malema said this in his speech at the launch of the Pan-African Institute at Kenya University, Kenya, on Friday, November 10, 2023. In his speech, Malema described France as brutal for continuing to manipulate their former African colonies even after their independence. He then said that due to France's brutality, all Pan-Africanists should support the actions of revolutionaries working hard to remove French puppets and influence from Africa, which seemed like indirect praise for Ibrahim Traoré. Julius Malema then said we should be careful of French-sponsored coups on the continent and accused Colonel Amadou Doumbouya of Guinea of being a French puppet.
The French continue to micromanage all the countries that were their colonies except the recent liberated zones of Mali and Burkina Faso. Comrades, the French are brutal to a point that post-colonialism, they still make certain African countries to pay colonial tax to France. The French are brutal because some of their former colonies, their reserve banks are still in France. They are not in control of their own economy, yet they claim to have an independence. We, as progressive Pan-Africanists, must fully associate with and support all revolutionary actions of fighters who are removing puppets of French imperialism from political office and power. Not all these actions are revolutionary, because we must be careful of French-sponsored coups in Africa, where we think there is a revolution taking place in Guinea-Conakry, only to find that there is a French puppet who seeks to replace those who were there before. There is nothing revolutionary about the Guinea-Conakry coup. We ought to separate that there can never be a revolutionary coup that reinforces French imperialism on African soil. Anyone who comes into political office under the pretext that they are fighting a French puppet while knowing they are the French puppet themselves must be isolated by progressive Pan-Africanists. All French soldiers and military must leave the African continent, and this also should apply to neo-colonial military bases, including the African Command Center of the USA. We don't want the army of America. We don't want the army of France here. We don't want the army of anyone. We want African army on African soil. The Pan-Africanist Institute should therefore provide ideological, political, and technical weapons to all progressive forces of the African continent to fight against colonialism.
The EFF leader then said Africa needs one standing army to fight the wars sponsored by countries seeking to distract us with fighting so they can plunder our resources, before touching on greedy African dictators and the need to unite the continent against neocolonialism and exploitation.
We need African Central Bank. We need African Monetary Zone. We need African military combat, because these pockets of wars that are happening in Africa are not of our own making. They are sponsored wars so that those who continue to steal our resources can do so uninterrupted as we fight amongst ourselves. So we need a military, a common defense system, the African High Command that will ensure the stability and security of Africa. We equally need a binding African court to deal with dictators who only exist in Africa to feed their friends and families. Those people must be prosecuted the African way. Sekou Touré and Emperor Haile Selassie prophetically said that the failure to unite the African continent will give rise to the neocolonialism and that African continent will perish. The revolutionary Pan-Africanist ideological and political diagnosis of the future was correct. The future is here. 50 years later, we know that we remain visitors in our own continent. We know that our resources benefit Euro-American than our own people. This is despite most African countries gaining independence from colonial rule since 1957. Massive, huge tracts of land, our mineral resources, our animals, our oceans are still owned and controlled by the colonial masters. There are no countries in the entire African continent that have gained full economic emancipation and independence. And this includes Ghana, which was the first to lead the road. Till to date, it can't claim that Africans in Ghana own the means of production. In 2016 report titled The New Colonialism reveals that there are 101 British companies listed on the London Stock Exchange that control an identified 1.5 trillion US dollars worth of resources in Africa in just 5 commodities: oil, gold, diamond, coal, and platinum. This is a very conservative figure since it includes resources listed by only some companies. Many companies do not provide the figures of the resources they control. And majority of these companies that do not tell us what they control and what they own in Africa are found in DRC, because they are the ones who fuel the divisions in DRC. They are the ones who fuel the fight in DRC, and they are stealing the resources of DRC because they know there is no proper accountability for such resources. The War on Want report on neocolonialism further illustrates that the fact that these 101 companies control and own the following key resources on our continent: 6.6 billion barrels of oil, currently worth 276 billion US dollars. They control 79.5 million ounces of gold, worth 119 billion US dollars. They control 699.3 million carats of diamonds, worth 134 billion of US dollars. 3.6 billion tons of coal, worth 216 billion US dollars. 287 million ounces of platinum, worth 305 billion US dollars. These are the numbers that reflect British neocolonialism in the African continent. I've not spoken about what French companies are doing. The Portuguese continue to play a significant role in the economy of Mozambique and Angola. The French continue to micromanage all the countries that were their colonies, except the recent liberated zones of Mali and Burkina Faso. Our leaders like their colonizers more than us. That's why they always seek after anything that looks like colonizers. I don't know if you'll regret inviting me after this. But my problem is that I tell my truth as is. And I say it to authorities without fear or favor. We must teach our people that we are not beggars. When we ask for reparation, we are not asking for donation. We are asking for what was stolen from us to be returned so that we can prosper and become a better nation.
Julius Malema's blistering critique of French neocolonialism in Africa reflects a sentiment shared by many who see persistent foreign influence in the affairs of former colonies. His call to support those challenging French-backed regimes aligns with the broader Pan-Africanist narrative of reclaiming agency and sovereignty, while Malema's indirect praise for Burkina Faso's leader, Ibrahim Traoré, may be seen as a nuanced endorsement of anti-neocolonial efforts. His caution about potential French-sponsored coups and accusations against Colonel Mamadou Doumbouya highlight the complexity of geopolitical dynamics. Furthermore, his call for a unified African army to counter external interference resonates with the need for collective defense.
Recently, there is a so-called NGO. It's not even an NGO. Because NGO stands for non-governmental organization. They are not non-governmental because they are funded by a federal budget, by a state. This so-called NGO produces reports claiming that the FDS and the VDP commit abuses. It went in here, it came out there. It's to tarnish your morale. It's to scare you, to prevent you from being able to fight. No. Moreover, we are going to file a complaint against this NGO because people need to understand something. What is happening to us here? It's true that they have manipulated part of our populations in the Sahel here, but they didn't have that kind of weaponry. What brought such significant weaponry into their ranks? It's Libya. Who destroyed Libya? It's this NGO, the same NGO that made false reports and gave them to those who wanted to create a rebellion so that people would intervene and overthrow Gaddafi. And the powder keg ended up being poured into the Sahel. These millions of lives that have been taken in the Sahel, we must file a complaint against this NGO because it is responsible for these false reports it made to support this thesis of attacking Libya. They have no moral lessons to give us. Look at the world. Let them go defend human rights all over the world first before coming here. We are fortunate to have similar situations in this world. You voluntarily committed yourselves. There are countries where people are forcibly taken, killed. You leave or you die. Others, even while trying to flee, end up dying. They don't talk about human rights because these people see us as subhumans. They see us as slaves. That's how it is in their minds. They have never changed their mindset, but it's up to us to show them that we are not slaves and we will never accept this state of affairs. It should not affect your morale. In the history of the world, there have been wars. And during the Second World War, people organized themselves to defend all over the place. But there is a country that could not defend itself, which had to come and take our ancestors to go defend them. And today that same country wants to give us lessons. The pot calling the kettle black. No. You are the descendants of those same ancestors who went to defend others, who liberated the world from Nazism. Today you are fighting for your lands. These same individuals dare to create terms to tarnish you. We oppose this. We will never agree. Continue to defend your lands. Questions that my generations are asking are the following, if I may summarize. It is not understanding how Africa, with so many riches on our soil, with a generous nature of water, abundant sunshine. Africa is today the poorest continent. Africa is a hungry continent. And how is it that we, as heads of state, travel the world begging? These are questions we are asking ourselves, and for which we have no answers so far. We have the opportunity to forge new relationships, and I hope these relationships can be the best to provide a better future for our peoples.
My generation also asks me to say that due to this poverty, they are forced to cross the ocean to try to reach Europe. They die in the ocean, but soon they will not cross because they will come to our palaces to seek their daily sustenance. As for Burkina Faso, today we have been facing for more than 8 years the most barbaric, the most violent form of neocolonialism, of imperialism. The slavery that they still tend to impose on us. Our predecessors taught us one thing well. The slave who is not capable of assuming his revolt does not deserve pity for his fate. We do not pity ourselves, and we do not ask anyone to pity us. The Burkinabe people have decided to fight against the terrorists in order to revive their development. In this struggle, brave peoples, courageous populations have committed to taking up arms against terrorism. Those whom we have affectionately called the VDP, the volunteers. We are surprised to see the imperialists label these VDP as militias and all sorts of things. It's disappointing because in Europe, when people take up arms to defend their homeland, they are called patriots. Our grandfathers were deported to save Europe. It was not with their consent, against their will. And well, upon their return, we remember well that in Traoré, when they wanted to claim their basic rights, they were massacred. So it doesn't matter then. When we, the people, decide to defend ourselves, we are labeled as a militia. But that is not the problem. The problem is seeing African heads of state who bring nothing to these people who are fighting, but who sing the same tune as the imperialists by labeling us as a militia, by calling us people who do not respect human rights. What human rights are we talking about? We are outraged by this, and it is shameful. We, African heads of state, must stop behaving like puppets that dance every time the imperialists pull the strings. Yesterday, President Vladimir Putin announced the sending of grains to Africa. We are very pleased. We thank him for that. But also, it is a message sent to our African heads of state, because at the next forum, we should not come here without having ensured for those who do not know war, the food self-sufficiency of our peoples. We must learn from the experience of those who have already achieved this in Africa, build good relationships here, and foster better relations with the Russian Federation to meet the needs of our populations. I may not be long, the allotted time is very short. We are obliged to stop at some point, but I would like to conclude by saying that we must pay tribute to our peoples who are fighting.
Yo, why do they keep trying to kill this man? After now 20 failed assassination attempts on the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, I now know why they're calling him the most important black man on the planet. He answers the question, what would happen if Africa just thugged out, took its own resources by force, and distributed them equitably among their population without corruption? Well, he did that, and now they're mad about it. And now after just 2 years in charge, he's got a list of accomplishments that put other African leaders to shame. Dude literally stopped the export of Burkina Faso's gold to Europe. Increased productivity, taking Burkina Faso's GDP from 18.8 billion to 22.1 billion dollars. Then the dude banned French military exercises in Burkina Faso. Then he kicked out French media and French troops. Bro built new railroads, new highways. He invested in all like hundreds and hundreds of tractors for their farming capacity. He got brand new high quality seeds for the farmers to produce so that they can feed themselves. And he banned them weird ass British powdered wigs they be wearing in the parliament and court. He was like, no more of that. We African and that just looks strange on y'all. And now he's spearheading the alliance of the Sahel states between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, because these are all formerly French colonized places. They speak French, and they just decided we gonna defend and protect ourselves, create a block, and trade with each other. Holla bad. Listen, this is leadership. So yeah, France acting like a jealous ex. Now that they see the one they abused doing good, they want to intervene with force. And here's how it plays into the greater picture. Because, in case you haven't noticed, the world profits from dirt, cheap African minerals. But in Burkina Faso and the Sahel states show that, number one, we can kick out colonizers, and number two, we gonna make y'all pay fair market prices for the resources within our dirt. That means that this might start a domino effect in Africa. Some are calling it the Ibrahim effect, and it's already taken place because young folks all over the continent is calling out for more leadership like Ibrahim Traoré. Low key, us Black Americans could use some more leadership like that too. African leadership and Black American leadership suffered the same problem. The OG original leaders who really was about the people got killed off. Our Dr. King and Malcolm X got killed off. There, Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara got killed off. And then a bunch of sellouts and greedy ass mooches and leeches have taken over and abused people's finances and faith. And there needed to be somebody to stand on business actually for the people with brute force against the colonizer and benevolence with their own people. And that is the example that our brother is setting in Burkina Faso. This means that we could be turning over a new leaf as a people if we follow this man's example, because it's like, what is white supremacy really but an evolutionary force for those who have been subject to it to overcome? And so when you're talking about evolutionary forces, you have to ask yourself, what is this force trying to make me? And the faster you get to that end product, the faster that pressure dissolves. So like, why did Africa fall? It fell partially because of its openness, because we had a kind of like Dr. Kingian way of looking at the world, and that everybody's our brother and we want to be benevolent with folks. Well, that works with folks who have that consciousness. But if they don't have that consciousness, you have to adapt the behavior necessary to meet the challenge to preserve your own life. That's what the Malcolm X's of the world were trying to teach us. But they got assassinated before they could adapt the philosophy into hard power. Some places of the continent, they did get really forceful military leaders, right? But then they went too far into the other direction and started exploiting and dominating their own people out of greed. Nah, the pendulum got to balance. You got to ride the center. You got to be Martin Luther King with your brother and Malcolm X to the other. So this brother, Ibrahim Traoré, steps up and he was like, let me learn the lessons from history in order to make me effective. I got to be benevolent with my people, but I got to be effectively militaristic enough to protect the beautiful thing that I'm building. And the sooner we get there, following this cat's example, humble yourself, be man enough to say I can learn from him, then the sooner that we get to where we need to be outside of this whole white supremacy dynamic. Because I don't know about you, but I'm done with that.
Because it is thanks to our ancestors that there is a France today.
Ibrahim Traoré, one of the youngest global leaders we have. At 37, he has already been in power for 2 years, president of Burkina Faso. The man is not just talking the talk, and when you listen to him, you hear and you feel the power. He is walking the walk. He is empowering his women. He has banned child marriages. He's banned polygamy. He's banned FGM. He wants his girls, his women to be in education, in power, in leadership roles. He wants them to take charge, not be stuck behind a sink. He wants their human rights to be protected, to be respected. We need more like him. He's changing the landscape of his country. He's moving away from the colonial power that France had upon it. He's also looking for more international partners. He's looking for economic reform, but more importantly, he's starting from within, a social reform. He's got rid of colonial wigs. He has cut ministers' salaries by up to 30% and raised civil servants' salaries. The list goes on, and you do need to listen to him. He has that power and authority in his voice. He's a revolutionary leader who's taking back and asserting his own independent sovereignty for his country. And maybe this is the beginning of a much needed alliance amongst all the African countries to come together. It's definitely leading the way. May Allah protect him.
Dear teachers, you who represent the world of education here today, those who impart knowledge, who must educate on the values specific to Burkina Faso, who must educate on patriotic values, be greeted once again. Take your profession seriously, for the future of our nation depends on you. If you educate these young children well, we will have a better Burkina Faso tomorrow. And if you fail, our homeland will have failed. Remember, the imperialists are waging what they call today the fourth generation war. The main objective of this war is to ensure that for generations and generations, our nations can never build themselves. They want to ensure that these children grow up in an atmosphere of terror and violence, unable to distinguish between right and wrong. And only you, by playing, can these psychologists help them distinguish between good and evil in order to be good citizens. Because for them, if children grow up in such an environment, we will have several generations that will never be able to make peace, who will kill each other, because the rule for them will be war. Look at some nations in Africa that have not known peace for decades. That is exactly what they did over there. We need to instill the values of our society in them. I insisted, through the Minister of Education, that you visit the museum to reconnect with our cultural values. This is very important for you. And so we have values on which Burkina relies. Integrity, honesty. You must instill these values in the young people you mentor. At the same time, you become their parents. In addition to that, I wish for patriotic values to be instilled in the younger generation. Today, more than ever, our nation is facing difficulties it has never known in its history. And to overcome, we need to have patriots, citizens of tomorrow. And to have these citizens, these patriots, the role now falls to you. Train pioneers. Teach them to love their homeland. Teach them to have confidence in themselves. Teach them to love their neighbors. Teach them to live as Burkinabe. This mission now helps you to evolve. Teach them everything you can so that they become very good citizens of tomorrow and ensure the succession. Your role is indeed very complicated because you now have to play the psychologist. In your classes, you indeed have children who have lost everything. You have many children who have lost their parents, who have lost their families. You have children who have experienced atrocities. You have children who have witnessed heinous crimes, who are traumatized, who are in shock. You must act as psychologists. You must ensure that these children forget this violence, become themselves again, and instill in them everything they need to be the citizens of tomorrow. So understand why I say that your role is very, very essential and full of priestly duties. Let us ensure that in Burkina Faso, we are not in this situation. The future of our nation rests in your hands. And I ask you to take this mission to heart and to transform our future generation, our society, so that we may have tomorrow citizens worthy of that name. And you promise me here that you will do it.
Captain Ibrahim Traoré has done it again, this time with cashews. Burkina Faso just launched a massive cashew processing plant, and it's not your average nutcracker setup. This factory is putting 20,000 people to work. Yes, you heard that right. 20,000 jobs from one plant. While some leaders give speeches, Traoré is handing out employment. His message is clear. No more lost generations. No more exporting raw goods for peanuts. Africa is done just consuming. It's time to manufacture, process, and lead. One factory at a time, Traoré is turning dreams into assembly lines. More of this, please, and pass the cashews while you're at it.
This video is going viral. Wodemaya, he's showing us the behind the scenes of Burkina Faso and how Ibrahim Traoré is making progress. We get to see the behind the scenes of how these roads are being paved. What's so interesting is Burkina Faso, since 1960s, since their independence, they've paved 3,000 kilometers of road. Ibrahim Traoré, he's planning on doing 5,000 kilometers per year. And Wodemaya asked the locals, how are you guys doing this? They told him that the private companies, they were taking forever to pave the roads. So the government, they purchased modern vehicles, modern equipment. You can see the brand, it's the same brands that they use in the US. Not only that, they train the youth in the country. You can see that the youth, they operate these equipment, and this creates so many jobs. What's so great about this video? Wodemaya, he documented everything. He's witnessed the roads being constructed, factories being built. He told us that the locals, they're so proud of their country. I think this is great news for Africa.
So I say to all of you in this room and all who are watching by television, we need to pray for our brother and his family and warn America, leave that brother alone.
We, African heads of state, must stop behaving like puppets that dance every time the imperialists pull the strings. When we, the people, decide to defend ourselves, we are labeled as militias, but that's not the issue here. The problem is seeing African heads of state who bring nothing to these people who are fighting, but who sing the same tune as the imperialists by labeling us as militias, thus calling us men who do not respect human rights. What human rights are we talking about? We are outraged by this and it is shameful.
Imperialism, as Thomas Sankara said, is a poor student. A very poor student because no matter how much you chase it out of the classroom, it will come back with the same methods. It cannot change. And often, it becomes ridiculous. When you look at the imperialist media today, you see what they publish. They use the same method to set Rwanda on fire, the same method to destroy Sudan, the same method to destroy Africa. It will not work. And today, I think you are well aware. They are very skilled at manipulating information, creating falsehoods all around. And mind you, these same media, I say it loud and clear today, especially Jeune Afrique, courted us at the very beginning of 2022-2023. They went through several channels to approach us, to make us pay, and clean up our image, as they say. We refused. They cannot deny it because we have the evidence with us. They sent people. That's how they operate. And many heads of state fall into their trap. They pay money every month for articles to be published to clean up their image. No, it's dangerous. They only live off that. You pay the money, they lie. There you go. They have your image. You refuse, they lie to destroy your image. But all of Africa must be informed. And if Africans want to progress, they need to stop listening to these deceitful media. Because as long as you keep listening to false information, it eventually becomes a reality. And it's very dangerous for us. This information is rampant. At our level, we experience this every day. And I always tell people to be very careful. All this is to divide and conquer. So, each damn person, each group must be able to perceive, the maneuvers of imperialism to advise one another, and together we remain united to build our country.
Have you guys seen what's going on between these two? This is Alassane Ouattara. He is the president of the Ivory Coast. In the Ivory Coast, they have been accused of a failed coup attempt against Ibrahim Traoré. This just happened last week. And this is General Langley. He called out Ibrahim Traoré by name. Some people say it was a smear campaign. And believe it or not, these two have teamed up. You can see Langley, he went to go visit the Ivory Coast to meet the president. And they're even taking a photo shoot together. You can see Langley sitting on the couch with the president. This is all very public. There's no secrets behind their relationship. Langley even got an award during this visit. Do you guys think these two are plotting something? It seems a little odd. They met up shortly after all that stuff just happened to Ibrahim Traoré. I don't think that's a coincidence.
Every oppressed people around the world can now look to Burkina Faso and to Ibrahim Traoré and say liberation looks like it's actually possible. Burkina Faso isn't just a battleground today for the Burkinabe people. It's the front line in a global struggle for liberation. What Ibrahim Traoré is doing is echoing in the Sahel, in Niger, in Mali, across Africa, across the Ummah, across the global south, and across the world. Ibrahim Traoré led a coup against a government that was subservient to its foreign masters. There's been many, many coups across the continent, but usually those just replaced one neocolonial agent with another, usually. But Ibrahim Traoré is different. He's not just changing the government. He is uprooting the whole system of neocolonial domination, and he's succeeding. He's understood what many people have failed to grasp, which is that independence is meaningless if you don't sever the control of the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. He's understood that security is a myth as long as it depends on the military patronage of your former colonizers. And he's understood that sovereignty is impossible under the shadow of Western tutelage. He's not merely a head of state. Ibrahim Traoré is the revolutionary archetype of the 21st century. He was forged in the reality of Western-backed insurgency and Western economic warfare and propaganda. Because, you know, today the fight for freedom is not just waged by armies anymore, but by narratives and by resource policies and by alliances and by collective sovereignty. Traoré has made the choice to look towards Russia and Turkey and towards other new centers of power in the multipolar world. That's strategic. Not because they're perfect allies, but because he recognizes the necessity of breaking the Western stranglehold on Burkina Faso. This is pragmatism in service to principle. This, again, is the methodology of Middle Nation. It's engagement without submission, cooperation without subjugation. It's trade-offs without selling out. He also understands, crucially, that Africa's liberation cannot be rented from outside. It has to be rooted in the reclamation of Africa's own wealth. You know, his moves to exert control over Burkina Faso's gold, building indigenous defense capacity and food sovereignty, these aren't just political decisions. These are acts of civilizational self-respect. It's a declaration that Africa's children will no longer be bled dry for the enrichment of Western imperial capital. So now America has said that they want to arrest him. You know, they've already tried to take him out more than once, like I said. Now they're trying to smear him. They're trying to attack him. They sent the head of AFRICOM to the Ivory Coast a couple of days ago, which is a neighbor of Burkina Faso and which is known to have, allegedly anyway, participated in the killing of Thomas Sankara. Allegedly, they participated in the coups or helped to organize the coups against, coup attempts against Ibrahim Traoré. And the Western sycophantic leader that was overthrown by Ibrahim Traoré is in exile in the Ivory Coast right now. So they're getting ready for something. Understand, Ibrahim Traoré isn't simply a political figure. He's a turning point.
All Africa is standing up right now. We are saying we are not scared of you. If it means death, bring it on. We are ready for you. One Africa is our minerals. The time is now. We are standing. Africa, unite.
Welcome to Owen Island Media. Thousands of Burkina Faso citizens took to the streets of Ouagadougou in a massive show of support for Captain Ibrahim Traoré and his military government. Authorities describe as foiled coup plot. The alleged coup was reportedly organized from neighboring Ivory Coast, and rally came amid criticism from U.S. officials, including General Michael Langley, who recently accused Traoré of misusing Burkina Faso gold reserve to benefit the junta.
The ruling elite of a country is receiving gratuities on the side that inure to the benefit of the strongman leader and not to the populace of the country. Does that sort of corruption and bribery go on with regard to the Belt and Road?
Absolutely, Chairman. You know, I see this, and I don't mind calling them out, but Captain Traoré and Burkina Faso, you know, as they know that both, you know, whether it's their gold reserves, that is all those proceeds are just in exchange to protect the junta regime. There's a number of examples across. Even in Sudan, what's going on with the rapid support forces and Burhan of the Sudan forces, when you get down to it, is all about the revenue that can be drawn out of that. And there are nefarious actors in the CCP or in sometimes Russia are complicit in those activities.
If you look at Chad, Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, in a lot of these countries, the coup is led by someone we trained. Now, I put in the National Defense Authorization Act a requirement for you to issue us a report as to how many coup leaders our taxpayers have funded the training for.
But let me say, there's no correlation and there's no causation of U.S. training to these members.
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out, because in like a dozen countries, the coup leaders are people we trained. Like, is it safe to say that this failed, General Langley?
It's safe to say that there's no correlation or causation of U.S. training to a coup happening.
AFRICOM's campaign revolves around central themes
of ensuring strategic access, countering threats to the homeland and U.S. interests, preparing for and responding to crisis, and lastly, bolstering our allies and partners. This campaign places our African partners at the center, achieving positive change by executing African-led and U.S.-enabled operations focused on our shared objectives. In Africa, modest investments and resources go a long way towards achieving our national security interests. Africa faces many challenges, but also offers even more opportunities. With our African partners at the forefront, reinforced by our efforts and the efforts of our allies, we will continue to gain ground towards achieving lasting stability, security, and prosperity on this crucial continent.
Africa is a mineral-rich, resource-rich continent. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay. Which are there success stories for the citizens of African countries when these larger, more prosperous nations or companies from more prosperous areas come in and exploit these minerals?
Chairman, there's very few cases. When the Chinese Communist Party is outed on them pulling out raw materials, not benefiting the populations of the host country, they've been trying to come up with ways how they can stay there and process only at the protests of the people of these African countries that host these mineral resources.
Langley, can you talk about why we care about what's happening in Africa right now? Why are we spending the money we're spending there?
For access and influence. I say that a number of countries are at the tipping point of actually being captured by the Russian Federation. The PRC and Russia are also remaining exploitative where possible and coercive when necessary. They want that ground. They want power projection capabilities. So for the most part, the rest of the continent is also for mining concessions, whether it be gold or rare earth minerals. Both of them have a long-range plan. But I think at the accelerated pace, the Russian Federation is really trying to take over Central Africa as well as the Sahel.
It sounds like from your testimony that Africa's in trouble. 40% rise in terrorism. What's your most pressing need that you can tell us for what we can help you with?
Senator, thanks for that question. My number one operational priority is protection of the force. And so as I stipulated in my opening statement, I focused on matching capabilities to the threat. When we match capabilities to the threat, it first calls for integrated air missile defense, and it calls for ISR. And other platforms would add to the capacity and capability of protecting the force. In closed session, I would be able to elaborate with more specificity, but all combatant commanders always ask for those aforementioned type platforms.
Why are you running?
Peep game. This is what you get when you sip that Kool-Aid for too long. This is what you get when you replace black power with black excellence. This is what the black community gets when we remain willfully ignorant that the United States military is a white supremacist organization. A black man advocating for Western intervention in Africa in order to stop African sovereignty. And this houseboy didn't just stop there. He also suggested that Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso was like other African elites and stealing from his country in order to maintain his regime. And not to play devil's advocate, but if you are the enemy of every Western nation, including the one with the largest military operation, and you just thwarted a coup not too long ago, I think spending a little extra bread to make sure you don't get assassinated is the smart move. But that can't be General Langley's problem with Ibrahim Traoré. Because the elites stealing from the citizens of their country is the exact same business model that gives him a paycheck. Nah. His problem with Ibrahim Traoré is that he has kicked out all the colonizers from his country and has set a precedent for Africans globally. I loved the energy my people had when it came to defending Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso. Let's remember to keep this energy when the state inevitably paints him as a brutal dictator when he takes the necessary actions to combat Western repression. Power to Ibrahim Traoré, power to Burkina Faso, down with the empire. So you got a black man advocating for Western intervention in Africa. You got a black woman voting against a ceasefire while a genocide is happening. And then you got a black presidential nominee to justify it all. Is anybody else noticing the pattern? Are we connecting the dots? These people are not put in these positions because they defied all odds. They are put into these positions to pacify the black community from taking action against the white supremacist state that is inseparable from our exploitation.
So we didn't learn. We didn't learn from last time. We didn't. So we didn't learn. Comprehension. We didn't learn.
When America tries to interfere in Africa, this video always comes to mind.
Corrupt nation in Africa, and it is. It could be the most corrupt nation in the world, Minister Farrakhan.
Oh, now, Mr. Wallace.
It is the most corrupt nation that I have ever covered. I've been there 25 years ago, and I've been there as recently as last year.
Fine. So what? 35 years old. That's what that nation is. Now, here's America, 226 years old. You love democracy, but there in Africa, you're trying to force these people into a system of government that you just have accepted. 30 years ago, black folk got the right to vote. You're not in any moral position to tell anybody how corrupt they are. You should be quiet and let those of us who know our people go there and help them get out of that condition. But America should keep her mouth shut wherever there's a corrupt regime, as much hell as America has raised on the earth. No, I will not allow America or you, Mr. Wallace, to condemn them as the most corrupt nation on earth when you have spilled the blood of human beings. Has Nigeria dropped an atomic bomb and killed people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Have they killed off millions of Native Americans? How dare you put yourself in that position as a moral judge? I think you should keep quiet, because with that much blood on America's hands, you have no right to speak. I will speak because I don't have that blood on my hand. Yes, there's corruption there. Yes, there's mismanagement of resources. Yes, there is abuse. There's abuse in every nation on earth, including this one. So let's not play holy to moralize on them. Let's help them.
I'm not moralizing. I'm asking a question, and I got an answer.
Why would you put it as the most corrupt regime in the world? That doesn't make sense.
Can you think of one more corrupt?
Yeah, I'm living in one. I'm living in one. Yes, you've done a hell of a thing on this earth, so you should not be the one to talk. You should be quiet when it comes to moral condemnation, in my judgment.
Ibrahim Traoré has opened doors. He has lifted a ban on visa for all black Americans who were taken out of the African continent over 400 years ago, and they are living in America and all the other parts of the world, developing, using their brains, their money, their everything to help develop those countries to come back home. That the door is open. They don't need any visa to visit Burkina Faso. Whatsoever way that you think you can help all the other Africans, come. Burkina Faso is opening the doors to you. You are not a foreigner. You are a black man. Situation took you there. And today, you are welcomed home.
I know I'm coming. They know I'm coming. I know they gonna be there, and they know I'm gonna do the best job I can possibly do.
We were talking about people not coming back to tell, and you were about to tell me a story, an Ashanti story.
Yes.
Okay.
In 1817, there was this British traveler to Asante, and he spoke to the Asante Hine at that time called Osei-Bonsu. And Osei-Bonsu was asking why the British had abolished the Atlantic enslavement. Britain had passed a law in 1807, and this was 1817, and Asante was beginning to feel the effects of the Atlantic enslavement abolition, because Asante was still engaged in a lot of warfare, so there were still a lot of prisoners of war. And this is where you see the relationship and the effect of Atlantic enslavement, because it would have been an easy access. You know, there would be access on the coast for all these slaves to be shipped. Now Asante was torn with what to do with all these prisoners of war. And then this envoy tried to explain to the Asante Hine that we stopped because he looked at the humanitarian reasons. It was bad, it caused warfare, it did this, it did that. And the Asante chief was very surprised. He said, "Oh, did you know this all along when we were involved in this trade all these years? But we didn't think it was bad." And then he brings out what our internal system and understanding is about enslavement. So it meant that when the two people were involved in the trade, both of them had a different idea of what was happening. So for the African, he knew the internal indigenous system, and he thought it was the same system which was being followed elsewhere. So that was the first time in 1817, when the trade had been abolished 10 years ago, that the Asante Hine was even made aware of the differences between the two systems.
You were saying just earlier that probably at the fort was the first time the African began to realize this was something different. Try to give me some specifics in terms of the kinds of things that would kind of stand out. Suppose a whole family's been captured, kidnapped, brought down from the north, traveled all the way together down to the castle. What would they encounter in the castle that would suddenly let them know that this is not going to be the same situation? You're not going to be taken into a family and become a part of a new clan, but things would be severely different.
Well, if whole families are taken, for example, from the north to the coast, one of the things which will strike them is that they'll be separated. And the separation would at once tell them that something is happening, because most people who would have families would want to keep them. Because in the African sense, the more families you had, the larger the family, the better. And in terms of labor, in terms of wealth, in terms of prestige. So you wouldn't separate families, you would keep them because they were an important asset. Now you get to the fort and castle, and the first thing which is done is separation. You are not regarded as one family anymore. You are separated. Father, mother, children are all separated. And that will be the first thing. The second thing, perhaps, which will surprise some of them, would be maybe the way they are treated in terms of harshness or in terms of even food that they are given.
I'm sorry, yes, sound is rolling.
77, take 2.
Talk to me about a family coming down from the north. What would they encounter at the castle? Why would they know once they arrived at the castle things were going to be different?
If a family is brought down from the north, for example, to the coast during the Atlantic enslavement, one of the first cultural shocks they would have will be separation. In the internal system, the more people you had, the better it was. So you wouldn't separate families who have been enslaved because you needed them. You needed them for social reasons, for prestige, and so on. Now, a family gets to the castle, and one of the first shocks is that they're going to be separated. They're not going to be recognized as one family. They're going to be recognized as any other individual human being. And perhaps another second shock any family which gets to the forts and castles will experience will be in terms of how they are treated. Because in the internal system, we've mentioned how slaves were supposed to be treated in terms of food, clothing, shelter, caring for them, making them as part of your children. And they'll realize at once that there's an impersonal aspect to the treatment. Perhaps even the food they are given may not be enough. Perhaps they will not be properly clothed. Maybe the same clothes they wore on their way will be what they'll be wearing. And so they'll find that they are in a different world altogether in terms of treatment, how they are cared for, what the concern of the new owners are. And I'm sure that would have given them a sign that they are in for something very, very different. And of course, if they are shipped across the sea, we know the story already. The experience in the ship, the long journey, and what happens outside, it's another further cultural shock. And what saddens me about this whole thing is the fact that people cannot come back to tell the story. They come back when it's very late, when abolition is in the way, to tell the story that this is very, very different from what we know. I have had some kind of cultural shock myself personally. In 1993-94, I was in the University of Texas in Austin, US for 1 year, doing some research from the American sources, because I had done a lot on the Ghanaian sources. I had been to London to look at British sources. And I was looking at the American sources. And from my experience in the indigenous system, I had an idea of how indigenous enslavement was like. And as I read through these American sources, sometimes I felt like closing the books because I couldn't take it any longer. And I couldn't reconcile. Sometimes I had to go back a few days and strengthen myself emotionally and come back and say, now you're a historian. Look at the facts as they stand.
Black people have lost their identity, but our oppressors have not lost our identity.
Well, you're talking about a myriad of leaders. You're not just talking about a single individual.
Right.
And I see a lot of people just be sitting back waiting on a messiah. They're waiting on that one person.
But they are too, though.
Who's that?
The other side is far more diligent about looking for that messiah than we are, because they know where to look. You probably wonder, why do white people pay so much attention to black people if they don't like them? You would think if you didn't like something, why would you be paying attention to it? I don't pay attention to things I don't like.
What's the answer?
The answer is the liar knows what lie he told. You see what I'm saying? So even if I made it deceitful and I made you think that the answer is over here, but the answer is really over here, I'm still going to be looking over here. Me, the one that tricked, because I know this is the right answer. Black people have lost their identity, but our oppressors have not lost our identity. That's just why they chopped those noses off of the Pharaoh and the Sphinx in Egypt in the first place, is because without this nose, we can tell you this is whoever it is. But with that nigga nose, it can only be niggas. Why would somebody vandalize a whole face and only vandalize one part? Nobody wanted to knock an eye off or take an ear off or no chins missing. No, just the nose. Because it's a brand. It's a brand.
And now, back to our regularly scheduled program.
And they started. In January 1961, they assassinated Patrice Emery Lumumba, and Congo has never been the same again. In 1963, they assassinated Sylvanus Olympio in Togo, and Togo has never been the same again. Then there were coup d'etats, Kwame Nkrumah himself. In 1966, eliminated via coup d'etat, all his writings, all his speeches banned, never to be read, never to be listened to until 1972, when Ignatius Kutu Acheampong rehabilitated him. Ahmed Ben Bella in Algeria gone. In Nigeria, Nnamdi Azikiwe and Abubakar Tafawa Balewa gone. In Mali, Modibo Keita gone. In Chad, everywhere, coup d'etats. Here in Ethiopia, 1974, if I'm not wrong, coup d'etat and the emergence of the Deg regime. In East Africa, Uganda, coup d'etat, mutinies in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania in 1971. All orchestrated because we were disunited and we were weak. The predictions of our forefathers and founding mothers that disunited we would remain weak came true.
Playbook they used for Patrice Lumumba, the same playbook they used for Kwame Nkrumah, the same playbook they used for Thomas Sankara, is the same playbook that they are trying to use for Ibrahim Traoré. And we cannot let that happen, bro. The action and image that Ibrahim Traoré represents is not only a threat to Westerners, but it's a threat to all the leaders in Africa that have been sitting and collecting dust and doing nothing for us, just squandering our wealth. We are not our parents' generations, bro. It's up. We're tired of being disrespected. Everywhere you go, Africans are getting disrespected. How much longer are Africans supposed to be living in poverty? Being self-sufficient, being independent, being defiant is what the threat is, because they know what it represents. I am a proud African as it is, but seeing Ibrahim Traoré makes me so much more proud, bro. That's what African leaders are supposed to represent and stand for. Not supposed to be docile, kissing people. Like, what do you carry yourself with some dignity and some pride? We're never supposed to be going around begging for nothing. We don't lack for nothing. Let's get ourselves together, couple our resources, educate ourselves, and get Africa developed the way that it needs to be developed. I know for me, all investments are going to Africa. So this is my call to all Africans. Unfollow all of these gossip pages. If anybody is not talking about something that's moving us forward, you're wasting your time, bro. You're wasting your time and you're wasting your resources. We don't got no more time to be wasting around, bro. And listen, we cannot leave it to the older generation. I already gave up on a lot of them. Their minds are colonized to the max. Leave them there. We got to do the work that it takes to get Africa to where it is now, to where it needs to be.
Ibrahim Traoré led a coup against a government that was subservient to its foreign masters. You know, there's been many coups across the continent, but usually those just replaced one neo-colonial agent with another, usually. But Ibrahim Traoré is different. He's not just changing the government. He is uprooting the whole system of neo-colonial domination, and he's succeeding. He's understood what many people have failed to grasp, which is that independence is meaningless if you don't sever the control of the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. He's understood that security is a myth as long as it depends on the military patronage of your former colonizers. And he's understood that sovereignty is impossible under the shadow of Western tutelage. He's not merely a head of state. Ibrahim Traoré is the revolutionary archetype of the 21st century. He was forged in the reality of Western-backed insurgency and Western economic warfare and propaganda. Because, you know, today the fight for freedom is not just waged by armies anymore, but by narratives and by resource policies and by alliances and by collective sovereignty. Traoré has made the choice to look towards Russia and Turkey and towards other new centers of power in the multipolar world. That's strategic, not because they're perfect allies, but because he recognizes the necessity of breaking the Western stranglehold on Burkina Faso. This is pragmatism in service to principle. This again is the methodology of middle nation. It's engagement without submission, cooperation without subjugation. It's trade-offs without selling out. He also understands, crucially, that Africa's liberation cannot be rented from outside. It has to be rooted in the reclamation of Africa's own wealth. You know, his moves to exert control over Burkina Faso's gold, building indigenous defense capacity and food sovereignty, these aren't just political decisions. These are acts of civilizational self-respect. It's a declaration that Africa's children will no longer be bled dry for the enrichment of Western imperial capital. We see Ibrahim Traoré as a brother, not simply because of his faith, but also because of his fight. Because he embodies the spirit of the Quranic guidance to stand firmly for justice, even if it is against your own selves, even if it is against those who are in power, and even if it is against the odds. Burkina Faso isn't just a battleground today for the Burkinabe people. It's the front line in a global struggle for liberation. What Ibrahim Traoré is doing is echoing in the Sahel, in Niger, in Mali, across Africa, across the Ummah, across the global south, and across the world. Every oppressed people around the world can now look to Burkina Faso and to Ibrahim Traoré and say liberation looks like it's actually possible. But obviously, the global order trembles at the prospect that anyone is going to follow his example. They're afraid of his courage and his clarity and his defiance in the face of Western power and Western threats, and they should be afraid of that. They should tremble because they know the jig is up. But we know that when they get scared, they get dangerous, and Ibrahim Traoré is under severe threat. There's already been something like 20 attempts on his life since coming to power. They just stopped a coup from happening last week, organized by the Americans and by the French, right there in the French embassy. Because a free Africa is just something that old wolf can't take. You know, they've been keeping Africa in the past for so long that they know that if they let Africa get away from them, then they're going to be the ones who are consigned to history. The chains that have been holding Africa down all this time are also the only things holding the West up. So now America has said that they want to arrest him. You know, they've already tried to take him out more than once, like I said. Now they're trying to smear him. They're trying to attack him. They sent the head of AFRICOM to the Ivory Coast a couple of days ago, which is a neighbor of Burkina Faso and which is known to have allegedly anyway participated in the killing of Thomas Sankara. Allegedly they participated in the coups or helped to organize the coups against coup attempts against Ibrahim Traoré, and the Western sycophantic leader that was overthrown by Ibrahim Traoré is in exile in the Ivory Coast right now. So they're getting ready for something. Understand, Ibrahim Traoré isn't just fighting insurgents and militants in the desert. No, every time he has to meet with some Western diplomat or politician or ambassador, he's fighting that same enemy. They're just wearing a suit and tie and meeting in some conference room or some embassy somewhere. But it's the same enemy that he's fighting in the desert. He doesn't have a meeting with any Western official except it's a kind of combat. Imagine, the same ones that are smiling at you or from across the table, those are the same ones who are also paying mercenaries to kill you. Listen, this is important. Burkina Faso is important. Ibrahim Traoré is important for everyone, not just for Africans, not just for the Burkinabés. This isn't about idolizing the man. It's about understanding the importance of what he represents. And what he represents is a paradigmatic shift that the whole world needs. You understand me? The OCGFC have been on a path of power consolidation for decades, accumulating more and more power in fewer and fewer hands, and leaving almost nothing beyond their control. We are in a struggle against this consolidation. Do you understand? It's a struggle for decentralization. That's the essence of it. That's what multipolarity is. It's decentralization. We need to pursue, protect, and preserve variance. They don't want there to be any options. They don't want there to be any divergence, any independence. But see, they built their power structure initially on the assumption that American power would last forever. Now they're understanding that they have to recalibrate. They need to transition. It's like they built one of those Jenga towers on a kitchen table, and now they have to relocate it. They have to move that tower all the way across town without it falling apart. Because now you have to move to the global south. It's a completely different terrain than what they're used to. So they're going to try to eliminate as many variables as they can to try to manage this transition so they come out on the top. Because they don't want their tower to fall apart. But if their tower falls apart, that is liberatory for everyone on this planet. Burkina Faso, as I say, represents decentralization. It represents variance. It represents a threat to the power consolidation. They see Ibrahim Traoré as a glitch in their system, but their system is a virus on humanity. Burkina Faso represents not only the promise of African liberation, but liberation for all of us. And the instinct for liberation is not a bug in the human software. It's a feature. So everyone should do whatever they can, and we should all do all we can to try to defend and protect Ibrahim Traoré. Because wallahi, this is a matter of self-defense. Ibrahim Traoré isn't simply a political figure. He's a turning point. They wanted the pivot south to just be another wave of total colonization, total subjugation and pillage. Of course, that's what they wanted. And their racism, their bigotry, and their supremacism made them think that our people were stupid, that our people were lazy, that our people were uninformed and clueless. They thought we didn't know what's going on in the world. They really thought that we were all brainwashed. They thought, just like a white slave owner in the American South, when a slave would smile at him, he actually thought that it meant he was happy and content with his situation. They thought that we were satisfied being subordinate and being exploited. They thought that we're all primitive and simple-minded and just accepted our servitude to the West as just some part of just some sort of a natural order. That's really how they think. They're so convinced of their own supremacy that they genuinely think that everyone else is inferior and deficient. They think we don't know how the world has changed. And they think that we are unaware of the fact that the West is running on fumes at this point. But the oppressed know their oppressor better than the oppressor knows himself. And the fact is, it's impossible for the oppressor to ever really understand those whom he is oppressing, because from the outset, he has to lie to himself about the oppressed anyway. He has to himself believe in a lie of his own creation about those whom he is oppressing, just so he can justify oppressing them. But the oppressed know their oppressor very, very well, intimately well. And we can see that you aren't what you used to be. We can smell it. We can sense it. We know when you're acting, and we know when you're being real, and you're doing nothing but act at this point. You're doing nothing but try to evoke your heyday. But you're just a shadow of your former self, and everybody knows it. The only one in the dark here is you. The only one who doesn't really understand what's going on is you. I'm telling you, the next 50 years are going to be drastically different than the last 50 years. And no one is even going to believe 50 years from now that America and Europe were ever treated like the center of the world. People are going to shake their heads in disbelief that something as repugnant and as stupid as Zionism was ever taken seriously and was ever allowed to wreak havoc on the Middle East. No one's going to be able to wrap their heads around the fact that you people presided over such a deranged global order that it made the most resource-rich and most important countries on the planet the poorest and most oppressed countries in the world. That's your system. And you have the gall to call it civilized. You have the gall to call yourselves advocates of justice and fairness and equality and human rights and so on. I'm telling you, in 50 years, your whole era is going to be universally regarded as a disgrace of history. And the story of America is going to be nothing but a cautionary tale for the nations of the world about how horrifically wrong a country can be. By your lack of integrity, your lack of morality, your lack of honesty, your lack of decency, your lack of humanity, you're going to become nothing but the epitome, the comprehensive reference point for everything that a country must never be.
Broke the earth. White people. Not all of you individually, but the systems you built, the empires you enforced, the profit you prioritized over life. You broke the earth. You didn't just show up and settle. You came with guns, greed, and God. You took land that wasn't yours, spilled blood on sacred ground, and called it destiny. You clear-cut forests, enslaved people, dug holes in the earth for gold, turned the sky into a smokestack, and renamed the destruction growth. You made the land yours by force. You made water something to sell. You made civilization mean white skin, private property, and concrete. You told the world that nature was wild, that people who honored it were savages, and that domination was salvation. And when the earth cried out, when her lungs burned and her rivers turned black, you didn't stop. You invented new ways to profit from collapse. Now you want to fix it? Now you want to lead the way? No, you are not the solution. You are the crisis. But this story doesn't end with you, because the earth is not dead, not defeated. It is wounded, but it remembers. It remembers those who loved it before you fenced it off, and mined its soul. It remembers the songs sung to rivers, the hands that planted with gratitude, the fire keepers, the medicine carriers, the people who knew the earth was not a thing, but a living relative. We remember too. We remember that your empires are fragile, that your borders are fake, that your wealth is stolen, and that your time is running out. The earth can be healed, but not by white saviors, not by carbon offsets, not by policies written in boardrooms. Healing will come through justice, through land back, through reparations, through abolition, through the return of what was stolen, and the dismantling of what never should have existed. The earth isn't dying, it's remembering, and it will only heal when white power ends. Cope.